There are 47 souls at Sharon's Gate, and I keep their world from collapsing. That isn't poetry. It's a checklist taped above a console. Warmth, air, water, power, the small comforts that keep people from tearing themselves or the station apart. 10 years in the Navy taught me the language of pressure, the hull's bass groan, a turbine's steady whine, the single off-key note that means something somewhere is about to fail. Down here, the orchestra is different. The RTG 900s hum in the powerhouse, the soft hiss of air scrubbers, the water recycler's patient churn. But the job hasn't changed. I listen. I intervene before the wrong note becomes the last one. 3 days ago, the wrong note had a human face. Harris, our youngest geophysicist, stood with both hands braced on the subglacial radar console, staring at a gray-scale image as if it were an altar. I'd come for a routine power audit. I stayed because the room had gone quiet in a way that meant belief had entered. On the screen, a neat ring a mile under the ice, 7 feet across by the scale markers, ivory pale with darker veins threading its circumference. Beside it, a human shape thrown backward, arms locked in an upflung spasm, mouth an O of ancient terror. The software's filters sharpened and refit the cross-sections into a 3D render. The ring was riddled with holes, some pinpricks, some the size of fists. The figure wasn't a fossil. You could read muscle lines under the skin. A cave bear's broken crest lay fused along one segment of the ring. Another angle gave us the tines of an Irish elk, splayed like a crown and half absorbed. The ice had kept everything honest and impossible. Within minutes, the glass door banged and Dr. Alan Carlyle came in with the wind still in his coat. He wore authority the way some men wear great tailoring, effortless, a little theatrical. He took in the image, let silence swell, and turned that gaze on us the way a conductor calls the downbeat. "Organize an excavation," he said, voice as smooth as a freshly honed blade. Intact. I want it in the core lab by nightfall. Orders rolled downhill. Tom Wallace, head mechanic and Texan evangelist of brute force, led the procession out to the dig site. Boots thudding on aluminum decking, breath steaming like locomotives in the -40 air. The cryolance turned ice into compliant fog, not so much cutting as persuading molecular bonds to slip, millimeter by careful millimeter. I watched the power curves from my HPAD rerouting load to keep the RTG's draw steady, nudging non-critical circuits to trickle while the lance drank. When the crane finally took the strain, the cable sang a high wire note through the cold. The slab rose, 20 tons, 30 more, the size of a small house, glass clear in places where the snow hadn't seeded bubbles. The station formed a slow funeral behind it, headlights crawling over the plateau, treads crunching on a hoarfrost. We brought the impossible home like pallbearers who hadn't decided yet whether they were grieving or proud. We call the core lab the ice house. Long shed, reinforced arches, room enough to park a tank. The slab slid onto the gridded floor with a groan you felt in your teeth. For a long time, nobody spoke. The ring lay inside, perfect and obscene, coppery veins tracing strange geometry over its ivory body. The Neanderthal hovered in the ice a few feet away, head tilted back, the cords in his neck standing under skin that still looked warm. Another forearm, another set of splayed fingers pressed uselessly into the ivory curve. The bear's skull, the elk's antlers, a harvest caught mid-bite and then put into stasis by a continent. I counted outlets and cable runs while everyone else counted questions. My job is the station, not the story. When he had us packed into the command room, Carlisle faced us like a CEO with a vision slide. "What we have," he said, savoring it, "is the greatest discovery in human history." He let it hang, then followed. "Given its unique nature and the circumstances of discovery, I am officially designating it the Carlisle artifact." Tom snorted into his sleeve. Across the room, Leo Gantz, our junior biologist, brilliant and unstreeted, looked as if he had witnessed a conversion. Carlisle lifted a hand for quiet. "Our priority is study." "We cannot study while it's entombed. We will thaw. We will proceed at once." He looked at me. "Engineer Rasca, full perimeter of thermal lamps, maximum safe output. I won't melt by the hour." "Chief," I said, keeping my voice level, "we're talking about dumping energy into an unknown. On a sub, if we found hardware we couldn't identify, we didn't plug it in to see what happened." We isolated and observed Carlisle's smile grew thinner. "This isn't a submarine, Mr. Rasca. This is the frontier of science." He pivoted like a lecturer, cueing the eager student. "Leo, the thermal energy won't damage the artifact," Leo said, half rising. "A preservation state of this longevity implies extraordinary stability. Heat is a catalyst, not a threat. He could barely sit still." "Thank you." Carlisle nodded with benevolent patience. "Engineer, your caution is noted." We proceed. Robert Miller, his deputy, a man crisp as new paper, logistics officer by past and bone, spoke softly to the room, to me. "Log the objection. The order stands. Work is work. You do it right, even when you know it's wrong." Tom met me at the equipment cage, shoulders filling the doorway, grin not quite hiding the doubt. We hauled 12 lamp units, heavy, finned housings, fan shrouds like turbine mouths, into the ice house and set them on a broad circle. I mapped the wiring, taped down runs in safety yellow, pulled a dedicated bus for the array so the lamps wouldn't brown out the med freezer or the comms rack when they ramped. Tom hummed a country tune under his breath, the kind that sounds like a pickup on bad suspension, while he lugged housings and I made the power neat. Back in the machine shop, I brought the first 4 lamps online from my console. The RTG 900 barely shrugged. 4 more. A clean step up and draw steady voltage within my models. Final 4, stable, then a twitch. A tiny voltage dip, so fast the fluorescence didn't blink, but the waveform on my monitor plucked like a string. I've spent a decade listening for what doesn't belong. A new instrument had joined the orchestra. I pulled up Atlas on my HPAD. Atlas keeps us alive. Temperature, oxygen generation, humidity control. The humidifiers were at 100% output and climbing, fans whining like they had opinions. Station humidity, however, was falling. You don't pour into a bucket and watch the level go down, but that's what the numbers did. My mouth dried in sympathy. The air picked up a faint taste of old paper. When I rubbed a sleeve across my forearm, static snapped like a tiny match. By dinner, the mess sounded like a winter camp. People complaining about chapped lips, pulling lip balm from pockets, downing water that didn't help. The air had the brittle feel of a museum's preservation room. Leo didn't look annoyed. He looked beatific. He held court at a corner table, sketching fluid loops on a tablet. I went for coffee and found myself within range. "It's a metabolic signature," he whispered, eyes lit from inside. "An inhibitory field, antimicrobial, an active preservation mechanism. Suspended animation via environmental desiccation on geological timescales. I see humidifiers redlining, I said. I see something tugging on our life support and our grid. But that's the point, he said, eager, almost tender. The meltwater will contaminate the surface, microbes, oxidation. The moment of first contact is the only pure data we'll ever get. One sample off the ivory, uncontaminated. You don't poke a thing until you understand what the thing does. He smiled the way a young man smiles at caution. I appreciate your concern, Mark. Really, but this is the moment he was hearing a different song. The first night under the lamps, the ice wept around the toroid, shedding meltwater that smoked on the hot steel grates and then ghosted invisibly away. By morning, there were no puddles, just a widening sheen of frost-burned floor and air like a desert noon. The power graphs showed small, regular spikes that faded by the time I could isolate them, as if something were tasting the line and withdrawing. I ran diagnostics on the humidifiers. They were fine. The numbers still fell. People woke with nosebleeds. I pulled 2 units from storage and hard-plumbed them into Atlas's intake. They screamed for a while, heroic and futile. Late on the second day, a yellow banner flashed on my maintenance screen. ICEHOUSEB offline. That unit's assignment, artifact surface. I tapped open comms. Leo, you in the ice house? Scanner 3 just dropped static. I switched channels. Command, Rasca, you got eyes on Gantz? Robert answered at once, calm, threading his words. Negative. He missed his prep check-in, likely in the ice house. I'm going, I said, already off the stool. The corridor to the lab felt longer than it had a right to. Air, hot, arid, pushed at us when the heavy door cycled. The lamps thundered, a dozen artificial suns flooding the world. The slab had slumped into a lopsided hill. The ring's curve was emerging like a whale's back from a thinning sea. Water streamed from the ice and turned to breathless vapor before it reached the floor. Leo! Robert called, voice small in that bright, dry roar. My boots scuffed over grit that hadn't been there the day before. Fine gray dust that clung to soles and left no damp prints. The artifact looked sharper. Its ivory surface had shed a soft frost glaze. The copper veins seemed to hold light, as if the metal remembered warmth from somewhere far away. We found him behind a diagnostic trolley inside the 10-foot perimeter I'd marked with safety tape. Knees down, head bowed, right hand clamped so hard on a small sample vial that bone tinted the skin. Mark, Robert started, a warning or a plea? I already knew. I touched Leo's shoulder. He fell backward into my arms with a dry whisper. He weighed less than a winter parka. His face had been pulled tight over its frame. The eyes were sunk and shriveled as if the tears had been taken, and then the humor, and then everything else that had ever made the eyes wet. His lips were black thread. When I moved him, tiny flakes lifted off his coveralls and drifted like burned paper. I set him down gently on the grate. There was no blood, no bruising, no mark, except an impossible absence. I pulled up station logs on my HPAD and showed Robert the twins. Humidity, falling in neat steps from the moment we hit the lamps. Grid load punctuated by small rhythmic sips. It's a desiccant, I said. Passive mode. It drinks water and perches on our power. Parasitic but polite. Get close, disturb boundary conditions, and the active mechanism engages. It unthreads moisture from what's available. Leo was available. Robert swallowed. His backbone of procedure kept him vertical. We'll move the... His voice hitched and smoothed. We'll move the body. I'll notify medical. He couldn't look at the vial Leo had died to hold. We carried him out on a gurney that felt obscene for how little it held. In the infirmary, the doctor stared at numbers and found nothing useful to say. I didn't need him. The logs and the body told the same story. Carlyle came in with his coat buttoned and his face set like a door you can't open. He took in the gurney, took in us. A terrible loss, he said, and put a hand on Robert's shoulder without quite touching. We will honor his sacrifice by ensuring his work continues. Quarantine on the ice house. My authorization only. Communications routed through my terminal. We cannot permit panic or partial data. Sir, Robert said, voice steady out of habit, engineering analysis suggests the artifact itself is protocol, Carlyle said, voice clicking from velvet to steel, will be rewritten where necessary. We are custodians of history. His gaze slid over me. Your theory is noted, Engineer Rasca. It will be evaluated in due course. He left without looking at the boy who had become a lesson. Lockdown turned the station into a pressure vessel. People whispered in corners. The science staff cloistered around their monitors with devotion. The rest of us pretended work still meant what it had meant on Tuesday. I parked myself in the machine shop with the ice house feed pinned to a monitor and the grid humming in my ears. Hours peeled away. The slab shrank. The ring lay clearer, its perforations like 1,000 small mouths. Atlas's humidifiers ran themselves toward an early grave. I dialed back lamps, then up again, searching for a profile that would move the numbers the right way. Nothing did. On the morning of the third day, something changed in a way that didn't belong to human senses. The copper veins in the toroid stopped merely remembering warmth and began to answer it, not bright. A smolder, dull and sullen, flowing along the metal like embers, learning to breathe. On my power graph, the small, polite sips became larger pulls, spaced farther apart, a rhythm settling in. I tapped my headset. Command, Rasca. Get the chief. Robert's voice came back tired. Quarantine is enforced, Mark. Orders stand. Then ask him whether his protocol includes what we do when the thing we thaw stands up. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. The wrong note was no longer a tremor on a screen. It was a tone filling the station's bones, deepening, gathering itself. On the feed, meltwater hissed to nothing on the hot floor. The ring's pores had darkened, like pupils narrowing to find their light. The air in my shop tasted of dust. I checked the clock, checked the load, checked the humidifiers screaming themselves hoarse. I kept listening. The wrong note was singing. The first time it moved, the station told me before the cameras did. A low infrasonic hum came up through the deck like a held breath. Bolts rang in their seats. A wrench rattled off my workbench and bit the floor with a clang. Then the thump, one heavy, resonant, like a slab of mountain dropped from waist height. On the ice house feed, the toroid had rolled 6 inches in its melting cradle and settled back, cracking the ice like old glass. The copper veins along its body no longer smoldered. They pulsed, a slow arterial glow that found its rhythm and kept time with the tiny power gulps walking across my grid. I keyed the station net. Command, Rasca. The artifact is active. Robert came back, weary and precise. Quarantine holds, Mark. Orders stand. Orders don't cover when it stands up, I said, but I was already moving. The machine shop door banged open, and Tom Wallace filled it, face wind-burned, eyes the clear, hard blue of a man who has run out of patience and grief, at the same time. 3 mechanics clustered behind him, knuckles white on tool cases. "You see that roll?" he growled, jabbing a thumb at my monitor. "And the chief's still got us pinned in here with it." Thinking time's over. "Tom," I started. He was already crossing to the cage where the K5 plasma cutter slept like a chained animal. He shrugged the power pack onto his shoulder, checked leads with a practiced tug, and glanced at me with something like apology. "You're the smartest bastard on this ice," he said. "Sometimes the only language machines understand is louder." I followed because I would not let them be alone. The ice house hit us like an oven door. The lamps thundered, heat shredded the air into ripples. The slab had slumped into a glittering berm that cradled the toroid's lower curve. Water stitched down the ivory and vanished before gravity could claim it. The sampler's hum was louder in here, felt more than heard, a pressure in the sinus, a fingertip on the sternum. Tom planted his feet, braced the cutter against his hip, and pulled the trigger. Pilot hiss, a cough of light, then a foot-long spear of violet-white plasma screamed into being and filled the room with the stink of ionized air. He brought the star down to kiss the toroid skin. Plasma that can turn 6 inches of plate steel into slag didn't even scuff it. The jet broke and sheeted away as if the cutter were a garden hose and the artifact were a wind. Heat clawed at us, but the ivory stayed indifferent, drinking energy into nothing. Tom leaned harder, engine rising to a panicked shriek. A quarter-sized perforation darkened, the way an eye narrows against glare. A thin, knife-edge whine came out of that single hole and bored straight into the cutter's voice coil. Resonance is a language too. The whine found the K5's operating frequency with obscene tenderness and began to feed it. The cutter juddered in Tom's grip, tremors climbing his forearms. He tried to release. His hands wouldn't obey. The power pack's internal safeguard stepped up, then failed in sequence like dominoes. "Tom!" I shouted. "Useless!" The pack went not like a grenade, but like a shaped charge, its violence disciplined by design. The shock picked up the other mechanics and threw them into steel with the lazy contempt of bad weather. Where Tom had been was a wash of heat, a smear of black on the grate, the sweet, sick smell of cooked protein. The whine stopped. The sampler's veins brightened by a shade as if a palate had been cleansed. Silence rang. Then the station began to remember it was alive. Alarms layering over the lamp roar, shouts on the net unbraiding into panic. I crawled to Peterson, the youngest of Tom's crew, and dragged him by his harness into the corridor. His leg kinked where legs aren't meant to. He moaned and tried to apologize to the floor. I slapped the emergency slap plate and watched the blast door heave down between us and the furnace. On the feeds, the toroid rolled, clean now of most of its ice cradle, gravity gathering itself around its mass in a visible persuading of dust motes and paper scraps. It slid through the door Tom had cut and onto the main corridor. It didn't hurry. It didn't have to. The map in my console painted the stations living with blue dots. 47 at the start of the week. Fewer now. The sampler registered as a whole, an absence that moved, erasing pixels of air and confidence as it went. It drifted toward the largest cluster of blue. "All personnel," Carlisle's voice said over the PA, smooth as ever. "Maintain positions. Do not panic. We are observing a new behavioral stage. Data is critical." "Data?" Someone screamed on the net. It killed Tom. The main corridor camera showed a half-dozen figures sprinting toward the hub's inner ring. One, Davis from geology stumbled, went down hard, scrambled on palms that skated on polished deck. The sampler came round the bend behind him, a silent avalanche. Ahead of Davis, the maglock indicators over the blast door winked red. "Who locked that?" I shouted, but I was already toggling to the command feed. In the command room, Carlyle stood at the lockdown console, hand on the controls as if posed for a portrait. Robert stood beside him, complexion gone the color of copier paper, eyes wide, in a face that hadn't yet chosen a side. "Remarkable," Carlyle murmured, eyes on the corridor feed. His voice was picked up by the console mic, unfiltered. "Localized gravity well. Robert, are you recording? This is invaluable." On the other screen, Davis clawed at the sealed door. He couldn't get to his feet. The floor under him had a slope his eyes couldn't see. The sampler didn't close the distance. It didn't need to. The field did its patient work. His boots slid. His nails left nothing. The toroid rolled over him with the same measured certainty it had shown everything else. His blue dot winked once and went dark. Robert didn't speak. He stepped back from Carlyle without meaning to, as if his bones had a say. I saw the moment procedure failed him. It didn't make a sound, but it left a crack. The hub dissolved into sealed doors and private terrors. 18 dots faded over the next hour. Some went chasing after others to try to help and were taken moving. Some hid where the airflow had always felt safe, and learned airflow is just another kind of gradient. The sampler patrolled, unhurried, the copper veins beating a workman's tempo. I watched it roll through the commons, watched a mug slide 3 feet sideways off a table to follow it, watched papers rise from a desk and drift after it in a pale wake, like dead leaves in the draw of a passing truck. I held the machine shop like the last sane room in a bad dream. The ice house feed went to one monitor, the command room to another, the map to a third, atlas to a fourth, the grid across the top like a cardiogram. I moved between them, hands that needed to work tightening and loosening the same wrench, the metal warming and cooling under my palm. The door cycled, and Robert stood there. He didn't look ironed anymore. He looked like a man who had discovered that following orders can be the same as pushing the wrong lever. He held his HPAD out like a confession and played the clip. Carlyle's calm voice, the click as the maglock engaged, the word remarkable rounding itself on his tongue. He stopped the playback and stared at me. He locked the door. I took the tablet and set it face down on the bench. Dizzy, my mind still sorted. Tom had tried force. Davis had tried to run. Others had tried to hide. Against gravity and appetite, none of those verbs had any purchase. "We can't kill it," I said. "We can't outrun it. We can't outweight it." That leaves a fourth verb. Robert's eyes were raw. "Contain." "Scuttle," I said. The word tasted of salt water and the hulls groaned. "Thermite purge." 2 key. Chief and engineer, I tapped my chest and then the air where Carlyle's chain would lie against his shirt. The only option left that doesn't end with that thing riding a transport off this ice in 6 weeks? He stared past me for a count of 3, then did what he's built to do. Opened the station schematics, routed around panic, and found lines and ladders. Sub-level service corridors, junction 7B to the main access ladder, powerhouse through the west bulkhead. If we can clear... He caught himself. If, I agreed. On the map, the sampler's absence drifted toward the hub's inner ring. We move now. We dropped through a maintenance hatch into the station's crawl space. A ribbed throat of ducting and cable, steel grates ringing under our boots, air thin and dry enough to chafe the inside of the nose. Our headlamps carved out cones of chalky light. We passed a section where a new dust lay over the grate in a uniform gray skin, like ash. Footfalls left clean prints. I didn't touch my tongue to the air to test it. I didn't need to. "It's been here," Robert whispered. He didn't ask how long. Recently is not a time. It's a smell. At the four-way junction, the overhead had slumped in a sag of ventilation trunk and torn conduit. Schematics said straight through. Reality said crawl or find a new map. Before we could choose, a shallow tray on an abandoned cart rattled. A loose bolt, nudging toward us, then another inch, then turning lazy circles. Dust rose in a thin spiral that had its own ideas about up. "Back!" I hissed, hauling Robert behind a junction box that stood proud of the wall like a ship's knee. The sampler slid in from the left, filling the corridor one featureless curve at a time, perforations black as 1,000 missed exits. It paused, as if it were listening to our breath through the panel. We were pinned. It would roll either past our cover and over us, or stop and feed the room around us into itself until air ran like sand. Robert's gaze went hunting and found a yellow-striped conduit he'd walked past 100 times without a thought. Backup gen feed, stenciled in black along its length. He shoved his HPAD into my chest. "The route is clear past the collapse," he whispered. "Go." "No." He didn't raise his voice. "That is a direct order, engineer." The word tasted wrong in his mouth, but it held. He moved before I could grab him, parallel to the sampler, keeping just outside the radius where dust began to lift. He jammed my pry bar into the conduit seam and heaved. The cover screamed and came away. Diesel, under pressure, hit the room in a white fan. The sampler rotated toward the sudden motion with a slow, implacable interest. Sparks spit and whispered from a severed cable hanging in the wreckage. Robert looked at it, the way men look at a lever they know will cost them. He looked back at me long enough to make sure I was still looking at him. "Go," he said again, not louder, just truer. He grabbed the live line. His body jolted and locked. He drove the sparking copper into the fuel spray. Thunder, white light. The corridor punched me forward and threw a metal taste across my teeth. My ears emptied into a roar that had no edges. I crawled, then ran crooked, then ran straight, because the path in front of me had no more decisions in it. Behind me, flame chewed through oxygen and argument. I didn't look back. Looking back is a kind of prayer, and I had no prayers left that weren't made of thermite. The powerhouse door hung twisted in its frame like a tooth knocked loose. Heat and diesel stung my eyes, ozone braided under them. Beyond, the room glowed with the quiet blue of Cherenkov light. The RTG's steady hum like a remembered lullaby in the dark. I stumbled over the threshold with both hands on the only plan that remained and felt the floor tremble to a new rhythm. The sampler's gravity, finding the room where all the currents met. The powerhouse glowed the way deep water glows when a reactor sings to itself. Cool blue, edges turned to ghost. Ozone cut through the lingering stink of diesel and burnt insulation from the corridor blast. The RTG 900's hum was the only true note left in the station. Everything else had slipped sharp or gone flat. Carlyle was already there, coat torn, soot chalked along one cheek like war paint, crowbar fretting at the purge panel as if he could pry the concept of no out of steel. He turned when I staggered in, and the smile he showed me wasn't madness so much as certainty pushed past all brakes. "Rasca," he said, the name dry in his mouth. "Come to vandalize the future?" "Give me the key," I said. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone who'd spent the last hour sandpapering his lungs. "You still don't understand." He wedged the crowbar and leaned his weight. Metal screamed and didn't yield. "It's an answer, finally. It's a bridge. You want to burn the bridge because you fear what's on the other side. 23 dead is what's on the other side." I stepped toward him. A loose wrench on the console slid an inch toward the door, then another, as if a slow tide had reached it. "And more coming if this keeps breathing." He swung the crowbar. I got an arm up and caught enough of it to throw us both off balance. We slammed into a rack of diagnostics. A cascade of tools made small, outraged sounds. He fought mean and tired, which is to say he fought like a man who'd been right for so long he couldn't imagine any other posture. We went down in a tangle. I saw the chain at his throat flash in the blue light and grabbed blind. He hissed when the links bit his skin. I yanked until the chain snapped and the key, polished by years of worry, fell into my palm. I flung him off. He slid and thumped, breath leaving him with a sound that might once have been a word. The floor trembled, soft at first, then with intention. Dust lifted and drew lazy arcs toward the door. The pitch of the room shifted, a bowl settling under a new weight. I didn't look. I didn't need to. A gravity that had never belonged to us was arriving. The purge panel gave under the master access and opened its throat. 2 key slots, glass flip cover over a single black button, the red stenciling no one on a healthy station ever wants to read aloud. I put my key in and waited for the second. The silence between clicks was a lifetime. Behind me, Carlyle dragged himself upright on one knee, face gray around the mouth, eyes still burning in a way that made me think of coal in a winter grate. "You can't," he said, voice gone thin. "You don't get to erase me." "I don't get to let it leave," I said, and I meant both of them. The toroid rolled through the bent door as if heavy steel were an idea it respected but didn't share. In the blue light, it looked less like a machine and more like a rule made visible. Its copper veins pulsed with a patient, confident glow. It ignored me. It ignored Carlyle. It tracked on the hum only a reactor makes and turned toward the core tank with the slow inevitability of a planet changing seasons. Carlyle started to crawl. He didn't look at me anymore. His good leg dug against the floor, fingertips squealing on painted steel. He was dragging himself toward the machine like a supplicant. The crowbar forgotten, his eyes were wide and wet and full of a faith I could have envied if it hadn't cost so much. I slid the second key, his key, into the second slot with hands that couldn't decide whether to shake. Turn click. 2 green jewels glowed up at me. All that was left was the piece no sane person plans how to do. The toroid slid past Carlyle, and something in him broke open. "It understands," he whispered, awe crowding out air. "It sees—" The word was lost when the sampler's field caught him and pulled. He lifted off his elbows, not far, not fast, but with a betrayal of physics you feel in your teeth. The perforated ivory kissed his shin. The effect was a curtain, yanked open, water unthreaded from flesh. The geometry of a man collapsing into a diagram of dryness. The scream he made began as a high blade and turned to a rattling hush. As his mouth emptied of anything that could carry sound, his coverall puffed a fine gray outbreath. He became small. He became lighter than the memory of him. I flipped the red cover. Beneath it, the button waited, anonymous and absolute. I thought of Tom's last sentence drowned under the cutter's roar, of Peterson whimpering apologies to a floor, of Davis at the sealed door, of Robert's steady hand shaking and then not shaking at all as he made fire out of fuel and duty. I pressed my thumb. The station screamed. A klaxon slammed a pulse into the air. Red strobes smeared light across Cherenkov blue until the room looked like an emergency at the bottom of the sea. A cool voice laid the sentence down in even syllables. Thermite purge system activated. Reactor scuttle sequence initiated. Detonation in 10 minutes. The sampler stopped short of the core and rotated, perforations aligning on the panel instead on me. It had understood too. The veins along its rim brightened, their pulse quickening until it sounded like a second heartbeat in my ears. It rolled, steady and unbelievably silent, toward the only lever left to throw. I stayed where I was. Running was logistics. There was nowhere left to root to that didn't buy it another minute it hadn't earned. My ribs ached. Every breath rasped along the desert the station had become. I slid down the panel until I sat with my back against its warmth and felt the countdown like a second spine. 9 minutes. 8. The sampler came close enough that I could see frost forming at the boundary where its field met the room's sweat. Its pores were dark as drilled wells. If you listen long enough to machines, you start hearing the lies people tell themselves around them about control, about inevitability, about which note belongs to whom. All my life, I'd been the man who heard the wrong note early. I'd missed it this time by 3 days and 23 names. "Mark," Robert had said, the last time his voice was not on a recording. "Go." The word carries a lot if you let it. Sometimes it means live, but sometimes it means finish. The timer was a presence because sound will make a companion out of anything. 7 minutes. 6. Somewhere above the powerhouse, sealed doors and bulkheads would be unlocking for no one and nothing. Somewhere far below, thermite dug its white mouths into shielding designed never to be eaten. The RTG's hum rose by a hair as the purge logic redirected the currents of our small world toward its end. The sampler reached the panel and hesitated, as if re-evaluating the puzzle. Its gravity plucked a wrench from a hook by my knee and held it an inch off the floor, thinking. It rolled another inch, put a patch of its skin to the steel, and drank. The panel's indicator lights dimmed and fought their way back up with spite. The purge system isn't smarter than a toroid built to take worlds apart, but it is meaner, and it is simple, and it has a head start once it's lit. 5 minutes. 4. Relief came on then, not because I wanted to die. Wanting had very little left to do with anything, but because the job was finally down to one step, and the step was taken. I thought of the first time I heard a hull sing under pressure and realized it wasn't threatening me. It was telling me where it hurt. I thought of the day I arrived on this ice because I was tired of crowds and ready to be small under a big sky. I thought of the plaque someone would bolt to a wall far away with our names in an order that didn't match the music of how we'd gone. The sampler pressed closer, the edge of its field skimming my boots. The leather cracked with a quiet that sounded like old leaves. I could have reached out and touched it, and for the briefest flash, some terrible, generous part of me wanted to know the texture that had held 1,000,000 years without bruise, wanted to scrape one knuckle over the fact of it and say, I met you. 3 minutes. 2. The room felt very simple. Blue, red, hum, pulse, the small sounds of metal, wondering if it would get to be metal tomorrow. I leaned my head back against the panel and closed my eyes. The silence I had come here for finally had a shape. It was 10 minutes long. It had a name I'd never say out loud. When the timer reached the last breath between numbers, the sampler did something almost like flinching, not fear, adjustment. It understood the wall it couldn't eat in time. It turned, for the first time paying me the compliment of attention, and rolled until the world narrowed to a ring and the dark inside its ring, and then to a single perforation that found the center of my chest as if I were a coordinate it had always intended to reach. 1 minute. I didn't pray. I listened. The station's last song was so pure it hurt. Somewhere, a long way off, the ocean that had once been over all this groaned in its grave of ice. The purge arrived. White day roared up out of the floor. Sound turned to substance. The RTG's voice leapt and then bloomed into a brightness that tore through steel and idea and argument and made glass out of everything that had ever tried to hold. Heat wrote its brief, perfect alphabet across the molecules of the powerhouse. The sampler vanished into that alphabet, and my name went with it. The official report didn't say my name except where it had to. Catastrophic reactor failure, it read, crisp and clean, classified for 50 years, filed by men who needed their desks to keep being desks. A cascade of unforeseen environmental stresses. The plaque at McMurdo put us in a kinder order, alphabetical. People paused there in summer and touched the names the way you touch a stranger's shoulder to make a path through a crowded room. Sometimes the wind made the flag chatter. Sometimes it didn't. For decades, satellites looked down and put a circle on their maps labeled Anomaly 7. When they finally sent a drone, it drew a mile-wide bowl where Sharon's Gate had been, a concave eye of black glass fused from bedrock up. The instruments wrote sterile in their tidy ways and flew home. Some cartographer, greedy for the small satisfactions of finishing a blank space, typed in a placeholder, Rasca Crater. No one remembered why. Far beyond any weather, an archival hub woke itself by habit and pinged a unit it had been built to love. For 100,000 years, the reply had come like a heartbeat at the edge of sleep, dormant, awaiting optimal conditions. This time, the line didn't answer. The hub went about its careful business, cross-reference, correlate, conclude. It found a flicker of local fury in a long-ago winter on a small blue world and closed the file with the grace of a clerk stacking the paper to make the edges true. Asset terminated, mission incomplete. No further action required. The light from a dead star kept walking into an empty future. The ice over the crater took on the color of sky and forgot to thaw. On certain clear days, if you happened to be very high and very lucky, the sun would catch the glass just right and the land would wink. One bright, careless blink from an eye that had finally learned how to close. If anyone was listening, the wrong note was gone. Only the hum remained.